So, hello everyone. My name is Anna Laurenzo and I'm a mezzo-soprano. And I am thrilled to be here with composer Andrew Rudin. And we'll be sharing one of his pieces on the upcoming martial opera project, the Oral History Project. And part of that is our conversation today. So, Andrew, it's wonderful to be speaking with you today. I would love to know a little bit about how you came to love opera. What was your path to opera like, and how did you love this art form?
Well, it's most unlikely. Uh, I grew up right after World War II in a very small town in Texas. Weirdly enough, it was discovered that the world's largest deposit of sulfur existed about 50 miles south of Houston. And I lived in a town that the company built only for its employees. So you wouldn't think this is a place where you'd fall in love with opera, especially since, well, I don't think the Houston Opera even existed at that point. And so the strange thing to me was that when I began studying the piano, which was my way into music, it wasn't too long after I somehow discovered, well, I saw on my teacher's piano a whole big book, and it had, I don't know what name it had on it, but I said, well, what is that? And she said, oh, that's an opera. I said, oh, you mean there's something that takes a whole book? And she said, oh, yes, it's like a sung play. Well, I was always uh, stage struck as a kid. Uh, in kindergarten, I had the lead role in a little play they put on, and I still remember how fascinated I was when we got to the stage and there were the colored lights and things. There's just something. Some people are born with that disease, and I was one of those people. But the idea that there could be not only a play, but there was animated by music. It's the ultimate. Well, the first really great opera, Monteverdi's Orfeo, has the subtitle "Drama per Musica," drama through music, and that's the key. That it's the music that brings it alive. It's not. I mean, just because you have a great play doesn't mean you have a great opera. Many people have found that out trying to set Shakespeare or Aeschylus or something that doesn't guarantee anything. And sometimes even a quite lame libretto can yield an absolutely heartbreaking opera. So anyway, in this little town of New Gulf, Texas, when I started taking piano lessons, it wasn't too long after that I, as I say, found out about that there existed such a form as opera. See, it's a different world today. I mean, there was no television. I mean, the mass media that everybody was into in those days was radio, and it was all sitting by the radio and imagining, from the voices what was heard. But the great outreach there was the 50-year-old sponsorship of the Texaco Metropolitan Opera Saturday afternoon radio broadcasts. And when I discovered that, together with the fact that even in our little library in New Gulf, Texas, in the children's division, there were a couple of books that told the stories of operas in ways that children could understand. The famous ones, the Tales of Hoffmann and Aida and Carmen. And so I would get those books out of the library, and then I had some music that told you the story, and then wherever there was an important aria, there would be the music printed out, oftentimes with very lame English translations. I remember I remember one of Il Trovatore where Strida Lavampa was translated as "sat there a gypsy hag."
It really sounds like there was a visual and theatrical component that combined with the music for you that was really made that experience special. So then what did that lead you to in your next steps? How did you go from, "Ooh, I really love opera," to maybe I'm going to someday write opera?
Well, I always sort of had that in the back of my mind, but my goal at that time was simply to learn to be a pianist. Well, I'll have to tell you that I began my piano lessons. Uh, I was pleading with my parents to let me have piano lessons, uh, even when I was 6 years old. And I can remember a year passed, and I'd been pleading with this, and here we are just before Thanksgiving, and I'm 7 years old now, and I'm begging, well, maybe after the start of the new year, he said. Well, to a child, you might as well have said, never, you know.
Yes.
And so I'm walking home from school one day with a little girl who usually walked the same and she didn't turn off where she usually did. I said, "Aren't you going home?" "No, I'm going to my piano lesson," she said. I said, "Oh, can I come?" "Well, I guess," she said. So I went with her, and the teacher said, "Now, okay, well, sit over there, but don't mess with anything and don't interrupt us." Well, she didn't have to tell me because I was just wanted to see passionately what was going on there. And when it was over, scandalous little thing I got up and said to her, "My parents want me to take piano lessons." And I thought I needed an excuse. I said, "I'm sick a lot and I need something to do when I'm home." I had
Mhm.
asthma as a kid. And so she talked to me a bit and she said, "Oh, well, I, do you have a piano?" I said, "No, but they're going to get me one." And And uh, I said, "My friends, Dean and Nola," I knew Nola took piano lessons, and they lived next door to the piano teacher. And I said, "They have a piano, and I know they'll let me play on theirs." She said, "Well, until you get your piano, you can even come here and practice.
Mhm.
I don't start teaching until 4 o'clock, so if you come after school, you can use my piano until." So anyway, I she gave me a book and I actually started. And a certain amount of time went by. I don't know how long exactly. It might have been 2 or 3 weeks. And I
Mhm.
learned to play little things at the piano. And John Thompson's first grade for the piano. And then one day something happened that I hadn't anticipated. She handed me a piece of paper and said, "Take this to your mother." And of course, it was a bill for her services. I naively had not considered that these lessons had to be paid for. And
Mhm.
then I was on the horns of a dilemma. Do I tell my parents that I've done this dreadful thing without their permission, or or do I just stop going to the lessons? And I couldn't stand it. I wanted to go back so badly that finally I faced the music and told them what I had done. And I'll never forget, they just burst out laughing, and they went to Houston and bought me a piano, and I was so lucky to have such wonderfully supportive parents because neither one of them had any clue about music, much less classical.
Mhm.
And yet they always, through my entire life, they were always there behind me, supporting me, never saying, "Don't do this. Oh, there's no future for this." They
Mhm.
they my mother, both of them were children of the Depression. They had to get through that, and they had to give up a lot of things that they had hoped they would do as young people. So of course they were very apprehensive for me.
Mhm.
But fortunately, I just always thought, oh, foo, I'm not worried about that. I'm just going ahead. And my mother would sometimes say, "Oh, honey, I'm afraid you're setting your sights so high." And I just thought, nah, and I went for it. And by the time I was 12, I had pretty good piano technique. I remember I played Chopin Revolutionary Etude for my recital piece that year, and that requires some pretty fancy left hand. And but it hadn't occurred to me. Oh, it did occur to me to write music when I first started uh, learning these little pieces out of John Thompson's book. Went to I thought these pieces are sappy. They had titles like "The Fairies Are Dancing," or the
Mhm.
wind loves the trees," or stuff like that. And I thought the pieces were dumb, and I made up my own little piece, but I couldn't figure out how to write it down. The pitches were easy. I could see which key I pressed, and I did, but getting the rhythm right, I didn't know where the bar lines went, and I didn't know rhythm is much more difficult. And in fact, even figuring out the whole system that we now use took centuries. But anyway, I took this piece to my piano lesson, and she said, "Oh, well, no, you see, this is a pickup here, and no, this is not in 4/4. This is in 3/4." So we spent the whole lesson there, rewriting. "Well, play it for me." "Oh no, see, you got this wrong." And then so we took the whole lesson to do that, you know.
Mhm.
So I was thrilled to death, and so I went back home, and next week I came back with another one. You should never use irony to a child. I remember she said to me, uh, "Don't bring me any more of these things. I can't help you with that," she said. I'm trying to teach you to play the piano." She said, "You don't want to be a composer. They starve in garrets." Well, I have no idea what a garret was, but starving didn't sound appealing to me. And the fact that she didn't want me to do it, but I often wondered what would have happened had she felt competent to and realized that she should bring me along with this.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, she did introduce me to all sorts of other things, and she taught me some basic theory and what have you. And I was very fortunate. The single piano teacher in this town was a woman who had a degree from a conservatory in St. Louis, and
Wow.
had wound up down in Texas living with her grown children. So I was very fortunate. Lila Crow, the woman who opened the door up to music for me. You never forget these people. You know,
That's
I was very thrilled when the internet came about, and out of the blue, I guess it must be about 10 or 12 years ago now, but her granddaughters contacted me. They said,
oh,
and they said, "Our grandmother always talked about you." And I realized I probably was as big a treat to her as she was to me, because
mhm.
really was passionate about it and just wanted to do anything she asked me to do. Uh, so, but then we moved to another town, and so that disrupted my piano lessons. But I was thrilled because this new town had much more extensive music program. In fact, quite lavish in the school district where I was. Uh, and I learned, I took up the cello there. I played the
Mhm.
trombone for a period of time. I even played the flute for a while. And this was all a wonderful experience. And that's where around age 15, I began to really try to write music. And I would write these little exercises for we had a full symphony orchestra in our little town there. And we were so lavishly supported by the industries that paid taxes there that we had a harp, we had full set of five timpani, tubular chimes, and we had oboes and bassoons and the instruments that oftentimes you don't find in small.
Oh,
But and we had a jazz band, and we had a symphonette, which was a sort of chamber ensemble, and there
mhm.
were two or three different choruses, and it was really quite a wonderful opportunity. And I would write these little exercises. By that point, I'd found in the public library orchestration books, which I thought were really fascinating. And I loved the little excerpts that would show you, oh, this is the clarinet duo from the Concerto for Orchestra, and this illustrates the Chalumeau register and these kind of things. So
Mm.
I read a lot of those kind of books in our public library there, and that's how I learned to, together with the practical experience of having an orchestra at my disposal. And so I would put my little, 10-bar excerpts into the folders, and then they'd say, okay, after we've done our warm-up exercises, let's read Andy's little
Huh.
and so I learned something very important there, that I could tell whether it was my fault or theirs.
One of the things that I loved that I read on your website when I was preparing for our interview was that this quote that you said, and you said, I had come to the conclusion that the ability of music to develop and illuminate characters and their emotional motivations was what moved me most about opera. Monteverdi, Mozart, Wagner, Debussy, and Berg were my chief inspirations. And
All right,
so, I mean,
how did
go
I
ahead.
leave out Verdi?
Oh, I mean, Verdi, yes. But those composers were very particular, all of them were breaking rules or kind of developing something for the first time. And so talk to me a little bit about this. I mean, you just mentioned that you've been very experimental in your composition, but how do you think that those composers in particular pushed you forward in your composition of all types, but especially opera?
Well, I didn't discover Monteverdi until quite a bit later, because, of course, I came into opera, as I say, through Gounod and Verdi and Bizet. I'm still astonished by Carmen. It doesn't seem to age. It seems like a contemporary work. You don't have to have them driving around on school buses the way they are in the current production for it to be relevant. Uh, uh, but it took some doing. At first, I didn't understand Mozart because I couldn't understand the recitatives because they didn't
Mhm.
have musical meaning for me, and I couldn't understand the language. So that took some learning. Uh, and so I sort of worked my way backwards. But when I was in grad school before I knew Monteverdi. Even as an undergrad, they didn't teach us anything about that period.
Hmm.
And uh, I remember the very first piece of Monteverdi that I heard was a madrigal called Zefiro Torna. I just was knocked on my ass when I heard that. I thought, that is such an amazing piece, and I still love it. I always direct people to it. But then when I found out that, he was regarded as really the first really significant opera composer, and when I heard Orfeo, I just thought, the moment that really grabs me in the second act, the first act is all celebrating the wedding of Orfeo and Eurydice, and the peasants are all dancing around and everything. The second act, the celebration continues, but then a messenger comes and she says, "I casa cervo," and then she goes into this long monologue, like she can't bring herself to tell him. Well, first of all, for him to understand that she's got the bad news, but she can't bring herself to give it. That's real understanding dramatically. And then when she finally says, or Eurydice è morta, and what is his response? He just says, "Oi me." And then we sit there with him speechless with grief while she now elucidates how this all happened. And we're thinking, what's going on in his mind? What's happening with him? And I thought, what? Anybody else would have had him come out with, "Oh my God, she's dead," and so forth. No, no. Monteverdi understood that something that powerful leaves you not knowing what to say, and I thought, what this is a true musical dramatist, and I remember how shocked I was when I discovered the coronation of Poppaea. Here are these terrible people doing all these nasty things. He sets his wife adrift in a boat and figures if the gods want her to live, she will. And then at the end, they sing a beautiful love duet and get away with it.
Mhm.
I thought, wow, so this guy had my heart forever from that point on. And I still, for me, that's truly where music begins with Monteverdi. I mean, there's a lot of interesting composers before Monteverdi, but uh, for somebody who leaps across the centuries to me and timelessly, and he's a wonderful vocal writer. I mean, he understands the human voice so beautifully. So anyway, but I didn't really quite dare to get into opera. Well, I'll tell you how the transition was made. You know, I I left the University of Texas because I by my junior year I was so at odds with the composition faculty there. I had discovered Schoenberg and Berg and Webern, and
Mhm.
they were all trained in Howard Henson's Eastman School, and they were absolutely dead set against it. When I say dead set against it, I was actually called in to the dean's office and forbidden to write uh, atonal music. And I thought, no, 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 no. I'll do any exercise you want me to do, but
Yeah.
you don't get to tell me what style to write in or what technique to use. You want me to write a fugue, I'll do it. You want me to, so forth. So anyway, at the end of my junior year, I told my parents, I'm not going back there. You know,
Mhm.
these people won't let me do what I think I need to do. And of course, they were up in arms. It's like, well, my God, you just have 1 year to go. Can't you stick it out? You know, there very fortunately was, again, my life is such a bunch of coincidences that it
Mhm.
happened. And if I hadn't had the good sense to pounce at the right moment, I wonder where I would have wound up. But there was an old man named Paul Amadeus Pisk, Pisk. And as a student in Vienna, he had studied with Arnold Schoenberg. And he was in the graduate division, and I sat in on an opera class. I remember that's where I learned about Otello. He was passionate about Italian opera, even though he was German, and uh, uh, and he had actually even discovered uh, uh, the lost ballet music that had been added to Otello in order to take it to Paris. He was there in the last years of his life, earning a good salary in a nice climate. And he took me aside and he said, "There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. These people just don't understand, and they're never going to let you go. You're just in the wrong place." And I said,
Yep.
"What can I do?" And he said, "Well, you need to be with somebody that is on the same wavelength." And I said, "Well, I don't know. How would I do that?" He said, "Well, I met a man at a convention recently, and he's going to be taking over the music department at the University of Pennsylvania. I think you should contact him." And this man was George Rockberg. And so I took a train up from Austin, Texas to to New York. I had a high school friend who was now living in New York, and so I could crash there. And then I took the train over to Philadelphia, and then I took the commuter line out to Bryn Mawr, where Rockberg was then director of publications at Theodore Presser. In a half an hour, I played for him a tape of my first orchestral piece, which was also my first attempt at 12-tone music. And he immediately, within that half-hour meeting, opened every door to me and gave me a completely free ride through the University of Pennsylvania. I had no idea I was getting an Ivy League education. A high school friend of mine, uh, offered to loan me his cabin in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. If you ever want to, he knew that I went away to artist colonies and stuff. And if you ever would like to use this. So I said, Anne, how would you like, she was in Wyoming and I'm in New Jersey. And I said, how would you like to meet up in Cloudcroft, New Mexico and just brainstorm for a week and see what,
Yeah.
so she said, that sounds great. So about 2 days before we're supposed to go, uh, Anne says, I've been thinking about what we might do. And I remember reading this short story a long time ago and thinking it would make a great chamber opera, but I can't remember who wrote it. I thought it was Thomas Mann, but I've looked through Thomas Mann and I don't find anything. And all I remember is it has something to do with Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. And
Hmm.
I'll try to find out what it is. So I go down the road here to a used bookstore and I say, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm looking for this particular story. And all I know is that it has something to, I don't know the author. All I know is it has something to do with Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. The guy says, "Oh, I've got that." And
Oh
he
my goodness.
goes and pulls it off the shelf. And turns out it's a story called La Symphonie Pastorale. It was originally in French. It was written by André Gide. And it has to do with a minister living in a small town with his wife and his grown son. And uh, and someone in his congregation dies, and when she dies, they find out that she was keeping as a ward this almost feral girl who was blind, and because she didn't really learn language, so he decides that as a Christian, he must take her into his household. His wife is very unhappy about this because they're already having a hard time, but he brings this girl into the household. Well, within a year, she's very bright. And then once she's cleaned up, she learns very quickly. And she's also very attractive. And uh, as things go on, the minister begins to overstep his bounds with her, believing that he's doing the right thing for her. But eventually, he has erotic designs toward her. And she, having never felt any kind of affection from anyone, it, unaware about what to do about it. And the wife all along tries to warn, and the son becomes disgusted with his father because the
Mhm.
son's about the same age as the girl.
Yeah.
And there's obviously some kind of attraction there. And eventually, in the Gide story, uh, she has an operation that restores her sight. And when she comes back into the family, she sees, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I in the midst of here? And she commits suicide. Uh, well, when Anne and I decided to adapt the story, we moved it to the U.S. at the time of the Dust Bowl out in the area, and uh, we thought, no, it's too much. Her killing herself. So they just get up one morning and she's fled, and they're left alone there. And the son now is so disillusioned with his father that he departs. And the father now realizes, oh my God, what have I done? And he throws himself on the mercy of his wife, and she forgives him. And my model here is the great opera by Janacek, Yenufa.
Mhm.
I find the scene at the end where she forgives him just to be so enormously moving. I don't know where he found the music for that compassion, but it's just so gorgeous. And so I can't claim that. Well, I hope to at least go in that direction, with so this opera, we gave the name of the town. There was an actual town that Anne found, uh, which is now a ghost town, and it was called Pure Water. So we just
Mm.
pure water. So uh, there is pure water. I don't know if you
Oh,
can see it,
wow.
but and it was all set with Jim's former company. Uh, they, they had set up, there was going to be a semi-state workshop of it in New York, and then COVID hit. And it all went down the drain. It was all cast and everything. And
Mhm.
I was so looking forward to it. And then of course his entire Center for Contemporary Opera collapsed. And
Mhm.
so here I am with this other opera that is waiting to be produced, as well as
Yeah.
Three Sisters, and yet my wackiest piece. It's so often in life who you know and what connections. Had it not been for Tito Capobianco and that program, that first opera would never have been done. And
Yeah.
I probably would never have gone along the same path. But But yeah, I love opera. I go all the time, except last season at the Met. I couldn't find anything that I wanted to see that I hadn't
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
And
Well, I love the story of all these connections and the literary influences in the opera. Maybe just in a couple minutes, could you talk about what you're looking for audiences to maybe hear when they hear the excerpts that we're going to perform on the concert itself, Masha's aria?
sure, uh, you know, everybody claims they know the Three Sisters, but I find that it's mostly people faking it, you know. But the the Three Sisters are, uh, in order of appearance, Olga, Masha, Irina. Olga is is the oldest sister, and she's unmarried, and she teaches in the school. Uh,
Mhm.
Irina is the youngest sister, and she's the one that has the, oh, I hope we were all born in Moscow. I hope we'll be able to go back there. Now, the first lines of the play are, a year ago today, father died. And they actually tell you it's the 5th of May. So you know it's spring. The
Mhm.
four scenes of the opera, it's clear, are the four seasons.
Yeah.
In spring, second scene is in the winter at the time of what we would call Mardi Gras. And then, although it's not specified at all, the third scene, I deduce that it has to be summer because
Mhm.
it's clear that the river, they talk about taking water from the river to put out a fire in the neighborhood, and the river would have been frozen otherwise, you know.
Yeah.
And in the last scene, they're outside the house, and it's clear that it's fall, and the leaves are falling. So it's a beautiful. Chekhov is such a great craftsman. There are all
Oh
these
yeah.
wonderful symmetries. So anyway, Masha is the moody sister. She's the one who's married. She somehow was convinced to marry the local schoolmaster, and
Mhm.
now she thinks he's a bore, and and she made a mistake, you know, and she's disgruntled. She threatens to leave before the birthday party in Act One. But then this dashing uh, young military guy shows up, and she's immediately smitten with him. And she unwisely initiates an adulterous affair with.
Mhm.
He's married and has his wife and children and everything. Shame on him. If anybody's the villain in the piece, it's him. But that's the beautiful thing with Chekhov. There's no heroes and villains. There's no
Yeah.
there's people doing things they shouldn't do, and there's people who are behaving really honorably, but everybody's got their complications, like we all do, you know.
Absolutely.
So in the second scene, that's where the aria that you're singing comes from, and and I'm really indebted to Bill Ashbrook for the text because uh, they're gotten together to have a celebration because you know it's a Lenten party and they were going to all get together, and so they're there playing games and doing different things, and and two of the men are sort of jousting with each other philosophically. Oh, you know, one of them says, you know, if only we could live long enough, life is going to be amazingly better because of technological things, and people will be flying through the air and all this. And the other man says, oh no, that's you're so full of it. You know that's not going to happen. Nothing will ever really change. People are the same no matter what. And Masha is listening to this, and she laughs at it, and they ask her, well, what's so funny? And she says, uh, oh, you guys trying to figure out the meaning of life, you know. And so the guy says, look, it's snowing. He points to the window. What does snow mean? Because Masha says, oh, surely our lives mean something, you know.
Yeah.
And he says, look, it's snowing. What does snow mean? And then we realized there's no such response to Masha in the play, uh, because but we realized in that whole scene there was nothing to give her an aria, and you know she's a character, she's got to sing something, you know.
Yeah.
She's on stage, we got to sing, so she got to, so I told Bill I need a response so Masha will have an aria, in this scene. So he came up with that text about can it mean nothing that the geese fly south? Can it be nothing that the children are born or that the sun shines? You know, and uh, and Masha is given to these mood swings, and so that all of a sudden, when she's been sort of giddy and having a good time, all of a sudden she's struck with the sort of the futility of it all, or is it futile? And in the middle of this man that she's now on the verge of striking up an affair with, uh, he gets word that his wife has tried to commit suicide, and he leaves, and this makes her angry. And anyway, so I was always very pleased with the way this aria turned out. And I was at the MacDowell Colony this summer that I was uh, uh, working on that scene, and I had written the very beginning, and I had written that aria. I didn't, I skipped around, I realized that was
Mhm.
a focal point. And so I wrote that aria, and what during the 6 weeks at MacDowell, uh, I finished the whole scene. I was thrilled to death and had
Yeah,
still 3 days in my residency. And anyway, one night at MacDowell, I invited some people in and I played through it at the piano and in my terrible composer's voice, tried to sing all the roles. And
sure.
there's a wonderful woman there who became a lifelong friend again, Louise Talma. I don't know if you've ever come across her, but she is one of the most remarkable uh, women composers at a time when nobody was doing that. Uh,
Yeah,
she's a really fine composer, and she became friends with Thornton Wilder there at the MacDowell Colony, and they wrote an opera together. And she became the first woman to have an opera produced in German, and in German opera house. So I'm playing through this score, and I get to Masha's aria, and I sing it. And Louise gets up in the middle of the aria, and she comes and looks over my shoulder. And then when I finish, she taps me on the shoulder and she said, "You've got a hit tune there," she told me.
wow,
I
that's
never,
that's always a good sign.
yeah, well, and I never passed that point in the score that I don't think. And so anytime I've had excerpts from it done, I always make sure that I include the Masha's aria, because I
Yeah.
do think it's bound. There are operas where you go to the whole opera just because there's one aria
Oh
that
yes.
you can't be without. So I'm hoping that Masha's aria will at least do that for me. But of course, at the end, when everybody's hopes are dashed and that only the three sisters didn't go back to Moscow and they just only have each other, I of course tried to write my Rosenkavalier trio.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Well,
all these great works that I've so admired over the years, I'm shamelessly lean on them as my inspiration, and yet people are sometimes surprised. I I wrote a piece uh, when my mother died. I wrote a piece in her honor, a cortege for orchestra, and I quoted Dido's lament, "When I am laid." I quoted that, and not one single person got it. I thought, I thought I'm being too obvious.
yeah.
I wrote a piece about the Texas city of Laredo, and the first notes are Laredo, and yet nobody ever gets it.
Well, you've made it something that's all your own, I guess, in some way. So, it's so you that even those reference points or those inspirations all come through in your own compositional voice. And I
Well,
know I'm really excited to sing the aria itself. It's really special, and I'm excited for people to get to hear it on this concert.
me too. And it's not so long away. I guess with my rambling on here, I've pretty much covered all of our topics.
No, it's been great to hear so many stories about your experience and all the influences that brought you to opera. And I know it'll be a real treat for everyone to get to enjoy the concert. And we're going to be closing out the concert. So I'm looking forward to seeing our audiences there. But anything else you think we should share with the group before we wrap up our interview?
Well, I will say that I'm delighted that we're last, and my least favorite place to ever be on a program is first, because people are still arriving, they haven't settled in yet. Uh, at the end, if you strike any kind of a favorable note, even if they've gotten bored along the way, they're happy to here's I trust that we'll give them something good to go out with. And I'm so looking forward. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. My absolute pleasure.